Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the GTR show. Super excited to have you here. This is going to be, hopefully, an amazing show because it's all about you. All right, the topic of today's show is all about this cable that's in the middle of my set here. The idea is to really focus on how you can go about having some great production approaches, like hiding cables and stuff like that, for creating great demos. I'll deal with this in a minute. And the idea is there are a bunch of home recording tips. I'm actually going to run you through a demo that I did that's part of a longer video that's getting ready to come out for Solo Dallas. But what's neat about it is there's an audio track and then there's also a video component. And although the majority of you may be focused on the audio side, I also wanted to bring in the video side so I can talk about some of the round trip process that I'm doing here. Not so I can say, oh, this is what I'm doing, but more importantly, so you can kind of go, oh, this is kind of some of the things that I might want to employ. And we're going to start off with the audio side of this, and I want to kind of walk through a number of kind of my go-to processes, a number of the things that I utilize, sometimes that I'll bring in that are part of an ongoing, if you will, peripheral process. So the idea is you're thinking, all right, here's my primary workflow. And then here are some of the secondary things that I do that will sometimes get on ramp that I've always kind of got just kind of an arm's reach away that I know I can bring in. And so doing, you know, it's not just kind of like you're in this one workflow and all of a sudden that workflow gets interrupted for something that you have to do, that you have to augment with something else. There we go. Good, that's what I was looking for. All right, so here's the deal. First of all, good morning, everybody. I can see many of you in Ecamm Live, the streaming application that I use, but not everybody. So if I miss you and you're over on my Facebook official page, I will jump back and forth as best I can while keeping in mind my best friend, the Focus Fox. All right, first of all, this is near and dear to my heart because one of my favorite things to be able to do is go, these are all the things that I've learned after making records, being one of the Guitar Hero session players, making a ton of YouTube content. And ultimately, it's always about the sound of the music. If it doesn't sound good, people just can't relate. And so, the interesting thing is Andrew Bonica and I, Andrew Bonica, have been friends for a long time. He's a former recording studio owner. He is a former product owner at Line 6 for Variax. He knows audio. He knows a bunch of things. And it's interesting when there are certain things that I have in common with people that I know that are like, okay, these are important things. So I want to talk very briefly about kind of some of the gear that I used in the demo we're going to deconstruct because the gear part is very important. First of all, I realized one very important thing this morning as I was preparing for this, which is like, I am fortunate enough to have a wide variety of guitars. So the idea is that when I want to do something like the guitar I'm using for this demo, I can reach just for that guitar. And quite often, it's almost like, if you will, if you got a football player that you're like the coach and you're like, all right, you're in. That's how I treat guitars. Now, that is not the majority of people. And I had to kind of give myself a talk and go, okay, what does that mean? So for me, that means the guitar that's at Gary Brower, my instrument repair guy, being brought back up to life, is an Ibanez S470, which is kind of, I can play anything on that guitar. And so that guitar is the one instrument that I can kind of sit down and basically use for everything. So my suggestion would be, if you don't have one, which you probably do, find one guitar that you can cover, let's say 85% of the stuff that you do with, or go out and buy a bunch of guitars. But the idea of having that one guitar there is cool. The Doppelgang. Oh, I love that. First of all, good morning to everybody. I'm not going to jump down into the chat yet because I want to stay on target, but it's great to see so many familiar faces here. You know who you are. I love you dearly, but let me follow the Focus Fox and good morning. All right, so the guitar, that's one piece. One of the other things is that increasingly the poor microphone has been abandoned into the digital domain for a number of other devices. And the interesting thing about these devices that I use different reactive load boxes in different circumstances. And so in this particular demo, I was using the hand-wired Princeton 1964 Princeton, which, by the way, is an amazing amplifier, just unbelievably awesome. And it turns, so this one, I just reached for the aux amp top box because it's just, that amp and that box is just like, it's just kind of a plug and play thing. Again, what we're hopefully talking about is a workflow and a strategy around that workflow. And then also kind of going, is this best possible strategy that we could have? So the idea is I literally pulled the amp out, stuck it on top of the cabinet, put the aux box top amp defibrillator on top, took the speaker out on the Princeton, ran that into the speaker in on the aux. I did not run a cable back out into the amplifier. Then I just ran straight out into Pro Tools. And that is so simple. And of course, the important thing, just in case you're not familiar with that type of box, and the great thing about it is basically replacing the speaker. You can, if you want to, run into a speaker so the guitar can hear the sound of the speaker in the room and respond, because that is an important part of this. I have studio monitors. I use the PreSonus Aris E8s. I think they now have an Aris E8.5 or whatever that is. Those are what's in my upstairs studio. They're just a slight upgrade. They are not grossly expensive in the world of studio monitors, and they sound great. Those are my eyes when I'm in the recording studio. These came in for review. I think I've said this a bunch of times. There are, I'm going to embrace the word cork sniffer. Decided it's no longer a downtrodden, we're talking about a select group of people that endeavor here. I would have to say that most of my friends fall in the cork sniffer category without the bad attitude part of it. So with that said, PreSonus is not necessarily a cork sniffer brand. These speakers have been my lifesaver and have been an opportunity for me to make sure that I, to my ability, sound great whenever and wherever I possibly can, to the best of my ability. And they're not grossly expensive. I think it's sub $1,000 for a pair. If I were to go out and buy any other speakers, if you were asking that, it would be the Focals. And I'd spend several $1,000s and I'd be sleeping on the couch for a couple of nights. Not that it really works like that, but I can't really legitimize spending a couple of grand on studio monitors when I've got something that serves me brilliantly and it's in both my rooms. The studio monitors are your best friend. I do not suggest mixing on in-ear monitors. I would suggest considering have a set of in-ear monitors to mix on because so many people are listening to music that way. All right. With that said, once I come in, I am it's a little bit out of frame today, but over here is one of my Universal Audio interfaces. I am a UA fanboy. Their plugins, their sounds, they're amazing. Their audio interfaces are phenomenal. I've got two little baby ones that I take with me when I'm traveling. One that actually lives in my upstairs studio. But there's an application that I will show you right here that is not that, which is probably streaming through right now. Who knows? Maybe I'm in preview mode. But it is, where are you? Console, there we go. Yep, that did stream through. My apologies. So that is console. And it's basically, as you can see, is basically a digital mixer. And it's basically like a console. And the concept here is important for a couple of key reasons. One, is that it gives you that old school vibe for some of us old school people. But the other thing is that is the in-between layer between what you're bringing in and what the computer is spitting out. And it's kind of around that environment visually that sonically you're able to monitor in real time without the delay of going to the computer's hard drive, doing the processing, and bringing that audio back. And that's what the Universal Audio platform does so well, is they allow you to process either quote-unquote printing to quote-unquote tape or monitoring with whatever plugins you want to use in real time with minimal latency, sub 3 millisecond latency, which for most humans you can't feel. And that's what I love about this environment. Their plugins, in my opinion, are second to none. While I am a fan of Waves plugins, the Waves plugin management system is the worst plugin management system in the entire industry. Just absolutely embarrassing for the quality of their plugins, how lame and infuriating. In the middle of a process, you're like, oh, I need to use this plugin that's a go-to, that's part of my system. So basically, Waves is not part of my go-to thing. I'm just like, you know what? You guys have made it impossible for me to work when I need to focus on working instead of spending 45 minutes on tech support with some guy in India who doesn't speak English as his first language and doesn't understand what I'm saying. Makes me want to slit my wrists when I just want to be jamming through my track. And I know everybody else who's experienced Waves tech support knows exactly what I'm talking about. But the point being is you want to be inspired as opposed to infuriated. Let me say no more on that subject. First of all, again, good morning to everybody. I'm so desperately containing myself, not jumping into chat. But please know that that is me attempting to stay focused with the Focus Fox. All right. So we've talked through the signal chain. The last thing I want to talk about backwards-wise is what happens at the very end. Because regardless of whether you want to pay attention to what I'm doing in the front end, hopefully all audio will obey when I go to do this. There we go. All right, so what we've got here is the mix side of Pro Tools. And, sorry, the edit window. So let me see if I can pull up. Oh, I'm locked here. Hang on a second. I locked myself out so I couldn't do something stupid. All right, in Pro Tools, I want to go over to the... There we go. There's the mix window. All right, so I want to talk about my my output chain, and I got to get over here. There we go. And boom. So as I'm over here in this little guy right here, my master fader, there are two things that I pretty much always do. And this is the secret sauce. So even if you just kind of tune in and go, look, I already have my recording process together, but give me some tips that I can use that aren't kind of the wacky stuff Doppler does. These are going to be them. Number one, this right here is the 1176 Rev A. This is pretty much always on, and basically I go up to my Andy Johns presets and I'll select the Andy Johns stereo bus. For those of you who don't know, Andy Johns produced like 5 million Brazilian top-selling records. To basically be able to put Andy Johns stereo bus on my stereo bus is a win. In turn, I will then run that into the Universal Audio Precision Limiter. This little box was designed by John Cunaberti to mimic what he was doing at the Plant Studios when he was the mastering engineer and had the bazillion-dollar master room there. For what I'm doing these days with Blackmagic DaVinci Resolve, I now, instead of going to -5 dB, have started going to instead of going to -4, I now go to -5 because Blackmagic seems to like -5 a little bit better than -4. So I'm just backing it off just a little bit more, and I'm just trusting that the DaVinci Resolve folks know more than I do. So those little two pieces right there. Oh, you know what? Hang on. Let me just run you through one last little thing about this guy over here. Is that this one I will mix to taste, and you will see that there'll be some overages, but basically I get it so I start tickling the yellow, and some of the audio will start to live in the yellow. So this is what I adjust. Generally speaking, and each one of the individual faders, you can see my bass is just a little bit above 0 there, but you never really want to be above 0 with those faders. So that then allows me to really, first of all, I don't have a huge amount of leveling with the Andy Johns stereo bus, but it's just got a little bit of grab, and with that comes a little tiny bit of compression squish, such that everything fits a little bit neater, and the sonic footprint of that box is amazing. And then in turn, the whole thing about the Universal Audio Precision Limiter, it just enables me to get things louder without it peaking above -5 dB, which basically is a very, very important part of the process. And so I can't say enough for that, because that ultimately is where all the magic happens. You want, whether it's just audio or whether it's video, when it comes up, a couple of things happen, and I'm going to briefly rabbit trail on this because it's pertinent. I remember having a conversation with Joe Satriani, and he was talking about another artist who would be inappropriate for me to name, but the idea of kind of how you set the output volume of your mixes. There was a period of time in the 90s that the whole point was to have the loudest possible mix, so that when it came on the radio, there was this excitement. Conversely, when your track comes up and it's quieter, you're like, oh. And so the track that's at the beginning of, it's what I call the pre-show reel here, was mastered by John Cunaberti. We got that guy nice and hot. And so the interesting thing is I put on the demo that this bit is about. I was like, oh, it's quieter, but it's not this in-your-face experience. So with that said, let me bring up, no, I don't. I'm going to need to do it like this. So I'm going to bring up this mix, which I have over here. Let me just make sure I've got it in the right spot. So we're going to be jumping between multiple applications today. And in so doing, we're going to have some fun doing stuff. There's my renders. Okay, good. All right. Good. All right. Let me pull up the actual track that we're going to deconstruct with the video as well. And then I'll be back with you in just a moment. Oh, we're in the Pro Tools window. And I exited out of Pro Tools. That I didn't want to do. Oh, well. The world will survive. Okay, and you need to be there. And let's do this. Here we go. All right. Choose file. And we're going over here, Solo Dallas Storm. And I always talk to myself, by the way. Here we go. Okay. So nasty, but in a great way. Thank you, Andrew. So there, what I'm doing is I am utilizing one of the things that aux is great for, is one, being able to take the amp up to a level then arguably. So basically, these days I work crazy hours. So I started this at about 9 o'clock. I started endeavoring. It wasn't until about 11 because I had to get this computer set up for TuneTrack / Easy Drummer, which it wasn't. So I had to get all my authorizations and get all those things up and running. So it wasn't until about 11 a.m. that I actually 11 p.m. rather, that I actually got started. And I finished, start to finish in about 4 hours, doing the audio and the video, which is actually, for me, actually quite fast. It's a very short piece, but at the same time, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to share this, because ultimately, although for some folks, take it to 11, at 11, Bonica, the idea is, how can I take this process and make it faster without losing the creative energy of this? So part of what we're going to do is focus on the kind of like, okay, right. So, the first, I kind of came to a decision about what I wanted to do with that amp and the Storm, which is like, okay, this is not my normal drop D guitar in Tele world. Normally it's the thin line, which sounds a little bit nastier than this. But the other thing is, because I've been using that one so much, I was like, all right, Doppler, step away from the thin line. And so I went for it with this guitar, and it's this is my Keith Richards guitar, is really what it's for. So it's like, I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to do. I wanted to do something Stonesy, but I still. I realize it's not amplified, but you'll hear a little bit of something there. So the point being is, I had a basic idea of the riff. I called my buddy Donnie up at Solo Dallas and said, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. And he said, that sounds great, go for it. So then I kind of crafted the idea. Then the hard part of the process was, once I had it, I had to go, okay, I've got a riff. I've kind of got this B section. Still out of tune, but the point being is that I kind of had my sections, but then I needed to figure out how I was going to make the drum part work. So what I want to do here is, first of all, let me just take a quick moment and say hello to everybody, going from the top down. Andrew, love you, my friend. Steve, hello. Alan, always a pleasure. Dop heads. I love you, dude. Adam, good morning. Jeffrey B. Scott, hello, my friend. Drew, great to see you. Melissa Doppler, thanks for all your help. Ralph, what's going on? Good morning to you, sir. Robert Valdez, good morning. Focus, focus, focus. Tell me about it. Oh boy. Okay. Pooh Ninja, great to see you. Hello, hello, hello. Okie dokie. Luis Moreno, buenos dias. ¿Cómo está, amigo? All right, now there is this one feed that doesn't come through, and I basically have to use 2 different Facebook accounts to draw. Okay, that one is, my brain is guitarized, not my fault. I love that, Drew. That is awesome. Okay, this is the one that doesn't come through. Daniel Henry, great to see you. Hello. Peter Davidek, good morning to you, my dear Canadian bass playing friend, Emmanuel Turret. I'll be seeing you a little bit later. Great to see you. Okay, so here's the deal. Then I get to this thing. All right, I'm going to bring in Easy Drummer. So this is where I head over to Pro Tools, and this is why I didn't want to close out of this guy. Right application. So we're heading here, and we're heading here. There we go. Good. All right. So now what we're going to do here is we are inside the lovely Pro Tools. And in case you're not a Pro Tools person, I apologize, but just bear with me. The workflow is pretty straightforward. I do want to talk a little bit about how I kind of set up my channel strips. I moved them around a little bit this morning. I always put the master fader on the right. I probably should go drums, bass, and guitar, because the idea is that way as you're kind of creating your mix, you have the ability to kind of bring in the things that you want to have as you go to build the mix. I also, you're not going to see this because it's an overlay, but I have, let me just make sure that's not coming through. I know it's not because unfortunately the way the streaming stuff works. Yeah, okay. What if you could imagine I have, oh, hold on. Let me see if I can switch to that. In Pro Tools, there we go. Memory locations, there we go. So this little guy here allows me to jump to different memory locations, which is a huge convenience as you're in the middle of a track, because you can literally just kind of zero in on the section that you want to get to. I'm sure you're used to the concept, but that allows me to just kind of pull up the top of the track. All right, what I'm going to do, hopefully intelligently so, is I'm going to go back and forth between muting my mic and then bringing the track up so we don't get bleed. This is always a little bit of a challenging process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically allow you to hear drums, and then you hear drums and bass and drums and guitar, because the idea is that part of what I do when I work fast is sometimes I will skip. Hang on, let's get me back over to this window real quick. Hi, there we go. Sometimes what I will do when I'm working fast, like I was in this particular one, because to go from start to finish of capturing the audio and doing the video and having it out the door, you sometimes will skip a couple steps that are not ones that are good to skip. So ideally, you want to, first of all, listen to your drums all the way from the top to the bottom. Just go, was there anything weird that happened? Generally, with Easy Drummer, I will take drag and drop, and we'll go through that in just a minute. It is the most amazing application in a moment. But there's a bunch of patterns that you can drag and drop that are MIDI patterns, and in turn, then you kind of choose your drum sound, and then those are married, and you can edit that by moving MIDI notes around and adjusting things in terms of their MIDI velocity, as well as going in if there's a particular sound on the drum kit and going, for me, it was the crash cymbal. I'm just like, all right, I had to actually, not on the MIDI level, but go into the actual application, go, that crash has just got to come down. It was like, it just was deafening. And sometimes you just have to make some of that fine-tuning stuff. So while we're talking about that, let's just go ahead and I'm going to create another scene here. No, thank you. And I still have my audio good. I'm going to create a Easy Drummer scene real quick so we can talk about Easy Drummer. And I'm going to get over to that application. And in theory, if I open that up over here, we will be able to get to Easy Drummer right there. No, that's the click. There's Easy Drummer. Come on, there we go. All right, good. That should allow me to get that there, and that should allow me to get that there. We're in the Easy Drummer pane. Is that going to come up inside Pro Tools? No. So it's a plugin. So that is a bummer. Okay. I'm not going to be able to show you that unless I go to my desktop, which would be a mad insanity. I'm not going to do that. So here's the deal. That is El Succo. Okay. So the thing about Easy Drummer is that, as I mentioned, you can adjust things from a number of different levels, and choosing the right kit for the vibe you're going for. The great thing is that this new version of Easy Drummer 2 that I've got with the latest updates has a bunch of the sounds that I normally used to have to go to in their expansion packs. So I was able to get the drum sound easily. So what we're going to do, I'm going to mute my microphone. I'm going to play through the drum part. Then I'm going to play through the drums and the bass. And I will mute my mic and hopefully remember to come back. But what we're listening for, again, is like we want to be hearing the vibe of this thing. And the biggest place that I got into trouble on this track, hold on, you got my audio. All right, there we go. The biggest place I got myself into trouble on this track was at the top. I just couldn't commit to what I wanted to have on the intro. And it's such an important part because it sets the tone for everything. I kind of got to where I wanted to get to, but that honestly took me about an hour of just sitting going and playing along with Easy Drum. And this is the decision part where you're in this creative mode. And this is a really important part for you to keep in mind, is that there is the, we're now looking back on this in a, if you will, a very kind of textbook way. This is what was happening. This is what I was thinking. But when you're in that creative mode, you're thinking purely as a creative. And sometimes you just kind of go, that's not it. And you're thinking through the creative lens. And sometimes that just takes a bunch of time, and you just got to be okay with that. The unfortunate part is like, it's 11 o'clock. It's 12 o'clock. And you're kind of going, so let's see, that means I'm going to be done at 4 in the morning. That's sometimes just what it takes. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to hear just the drums and just the bass. And I'm going to mute this microphone, and hopefully I'll remember to unmute it when I come back. And so while I'm doing that, let me prep just the drums, and those are muted, and we're good to go. And okay. Adding bass. So there might have been a little tiny bit of peaking there, and so I'm going to pull my overall level back, but I didn't want to do it while I was playing. So now what I want to do is something that is Pro Tools looping. So now what I want to do is something I would not normally do, but I wanted to, is you're going to hear the bass soloed on its own. And you'll hear on a boom, 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 boom. I pull miles back in the track, and when it's soloed, as I was listening to it this morning, I'm like, wait a second, what? But then when you listen back to the way it sits with the drums, you kind of go, it made sense. But on its own, this was nuts. So this is just the bass, and this is where setting up those markers really helps. So let me switch over to Pro Tools, and what I'm going to do in Pro Tools is I'm actually going to switch over to the edit window here. There we go. just because it's a little bit more exciting. And I will tell you a couple of things that I do. At the top of the track, you can see where I was just kind of messing around with different ideas. And that's where I'll be kind of fiddling around with the MIDI a little bit. And I like to leave that just in case there's anything I want to come back to. Then over to the far right-hand side, you'll see kind of leftovers where there's stuff that I liked, but I dragged off to the right that represented certain things that I changed. So the main body there, that big long purple line in the center, is the actual track, and you can actually see where it's kind of blinking there is where the beginning of the bass comes in. And you will see that I made a couple of little edits. So let's take a listen to just the bass on its own. And I'm going to mute this microphone. The bass is soloed, and here we go. All right, so when I listened to that thing, I was like, wait a second, what is the bass doing there? So now I want you to hear in the framework of the snare drum what's actually happening. And then you kind of go, oh, interesting. But it's just one of those things where, and it's interesting, when I was doing this, I did not solo the bass because here's my whole thing, generally speaking. And there were a couple little spots that I fixed actually there was one spot that I was like, okay, that I can hear in the framework of the mix. But in terms of the tone, I was going, that by the way is the Ampeg flip top amp. I was going for a very vintage thing. So I literally pulled up the instance of the plugin. I was like, sounds great. No need to tweak. If it sounds and feels great, you just leave it. You know, when you listen on its own, you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. But in the framework of the track with the Charlie Watts snare drum vibe, I was like, don't need to touch it. And everything lived in its own little universe, right? So the idea with that is just enabled me to just jump right in and do that. So now what I want to do is I'm going to play the up through the first pullback on that bass part so you can hear how really nasty that is. Then I'm going to go back and bring the bass and the drums in together. So what's so completely weird and bizarre about that is having played with so many different musicians, I'm really sensitive to where the click is and where the drums are. And one of the things I love about Easy Drummer is that the performances are basically MIDI-ized actual drum performances. And they're not quantized, which means they're not all set right to the click. And so in the midst of this, one of the tracks that you will see that I had up there, switching views. All right, there we go. So we're in this view here. There you go. You can see that I had up there is the click track. And it's muted right now, but that, I almost always will have the click track going because that enables me to just kind of go, where is true north? I don't care if Easy Drummer moves a little bit. But ironically, I'm choosing where I'm sitting on top. If the drums are a horse, I'm choosing how far back I'm sitting in the saddle. And it's one of those things that when we now add the guitar in, you'll really hear the juxtaposition, what that enables the guitar to do. And it's always possible that I was also reacting to this thing where there's the click. Tells you where true north is. Somebody like that. Thank you very much. Jim, what's going on? Great to see you, my friend. Peter, thank you so much. Peter's a phenomenal bass player, so praise from him is high praise. Mike Rand, good morning to you. So the idea is there's true north. There's the drum part, which they purposely leave a little bit loosey-goosey. So again, that's the horse you want to ride because it feels human, right? There's no drummer in the room. So I want to maintain that. Sometimes I will quantize things in Easy Drummer when I'm just like, you know what, it's moving more than I can deal with, and I've just got to get something done. But I love the fact that it feels loosey-goosey. So then I have to choose where I'm going to, again, sit on top of where that saddle is going to sit on top of the drum track. But also, as a guitar player, I don't sit perfectly in time. And the other thing is, when you're imitating Keith Richards, which is basically my whole vibe here, it's kind of like life's been good to me so far. I was thinking about all the tracks that I was ripping off. So it's a combination of all the Stones. Life's been good to me. I was listening to that this morning, just listened to it. Although the guitar part got a very different tone, I was like, yeah, because it immediately came to me which thing I'm ripping off. As a demo guy, I want to be doing something that is familiar enough, but not too familiar that you kind of go, oh, it's got some of that on there, right? And it also gives me a chance to listen to pull up. So as I was preparing for this, I pulled up some Stones tracks. And what I'm doing is markedly brighter than what the Stones is. So the point of that is this. That's going to be our thing. The point of that is we'll know what we're bringing to Focus Fox, is that sometimes you want to imitate something that's famous. But it doesn't have to sound exactly like the tone for people to begin to go, that's that sound. All of a sudden you listen back, it's like, no, that's not that sound at all. It sounds really different, but it still is reminiscent of that. All right, let me bring in the guitar player here. This time with the microphone on, I was seeing that I was getting some peaking there. So what I'm doing is I pulled back the master fader inside Pro Tools because I noticed it was distorting just a little bit. I was beyond tickling the yellows. I was tickling the red, which is bad. So I want it to sound right here. So I pulled my output on inside my streaming application, but I've also brought the output back a little bit inside Pro Tools. So and if I notice it still continues to peak a little bit, I'll pull it back a little bit further. But I didn't want to do it in the middle of playback. Here we go. Okay, so the interesting thing about all of this is the bass part was one take, and because everything was being videoed, I have an A camera and a... Remind me to take Pro Tools out of loop. All right, where are you? All right, there we go. So there's a B camera, which I've got over here. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, there we go. So basically, I kind of sit about here, and it's really funny. I'll give you one of my favorite tells. So like at the beginning of the track... and at a certain point, you kind of have to look up as opposed to like face totally glued to this thing. So there's usually kind of like right around the beginning of the second or the third bar, I'll kind of do this thing with my head. It's really kind of funny, but it's trying to make it look like, oh, I'm into the track. I'm having the amazing time. But it's because I know at the top, I've got to be perfectly seated in the track. So I'm usually over here looking at the headstock, just totally buried in thought. And then you got to make it look like it's cool. So what I want to do now is I want to pull up the video again of all those pieces, and let's do that here. Muting. No, got it. All right. So, that was sorry. Let me read that again. So that's my buddy Peter Daviduck from Canada, amazing bass player. Love today's topic. Thank you so much. Timing is hilarious as I've just been called, asked, emailed to play on a track, so I'm off to vibe some basso profundo, profound bass. I love that, and he's the guy that can do that for another virtual session. Much love, Doug. Peter, always a pleasure. So here's the thing: is bass is the interesting thing about bass, and it's one of the reasons I love it so much, is that the entire track, as much as it is tethered to the drums, the bass player is ultimately the person who makes the biggest decisions in the track, and you'll never know it. But what happens is harmonically and rhythmically, where I choose to shift how I'm playing relationally to the drums, everything else pretty much begins to be impacted by that. Where I pull back, doom, 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 boom, doom, doom, boom, boom, boom. So I'm choosing where the track is pulling forward, and I should say pushing forward and pulling back. And that's all happening at the bass in terms of where it's sitting, again, if you will, on the saddle. We leaning forward or we pulling back. And in turn, that provides the breath, because when the guitar does that, it usually will do that in a way that's not in sync with the other stuff. It's just kind of doing that. And those decisions happen at a creative level, but at the same time, it's still there. Now, interestingly enough, about this particular track is that the drums and the guitar were already cut. This is one of the mistakes that I make sometimes when I'm working quickly, which is like, I'll just get the guitar and video all the pieces, make sure that they're actually on this one, because I've got this process between the A camera and the B camera, so dialed and basically, I got to show you this. Hang on. This is kind of funny because you'll get a kick out of this. I want to introduce you to Joe Satriani. So Joe Satriani is my other Focus Fox. So this is where I put, right about there, that's where I put the B cam. And so what I will do is that I will focus Joe here and get Joe in focus kind of wherever it is that I choose to have the B cam. Sometimes I have to put a little bit sideways. We got sideways Joe there. But Joe's face is my Focus Fox. And so Joe's always nearby. And so this is, I forget which tour this is from, but they basically gave these out, and one of my students gave me this. So it's always here in the studio. I've taped Joe to that box there. So that's kind of one of the fun things, that I'm always having. It always makes the process a little bit fun and wacky to pull that thing out. But that's how I get the focus going on my B camera. And So the ability to, I know that I need to kind of get that down the neck headstock shot, which, as we kind of toggle between a couple of different things, since there aren't any questions, I'm just going to kind of keep going here across the thread of this thing, which is the idea. Cedric, Dennis, yes, unmute. Thank you. Appreciate that. Sometimes a little late, but in any case, the idea is that most of us are thinking more and more about kind of some video component around what we do. YouTube is it's not going anywhere. The same thing with Facebook or Facebook Live. We know that this is part of how we reach the people that we reach. So I wanted to include a little bit of a component of this talking about video, and I will say that I'm an expensive. Yeah, thank you, Adam. It's just one of those things. I'm getting better at it, but I ain't perfect. So thank you for the heads up. Please keep them coming through. And here's the thing, Adam. The great thing is. There are times that I do, like if it's a metal double bassy thing, I'm so paranoid of people thinking that I'm not honestly perfectly in time, which is really just such a stupid thought. But at the same time, you have these thoughts that you're playing, or sometimes you're not even having them play; they just play, and you're just like, your perception about people's perception about you. Plays an interesting role in this whole process. So the point being is that when I get into some sort of metal environment, I really, I want to have really great time with 8th notes or 16th notes, but I'm also a little paranoid. It's like, there are people that have better time than I do that are just going to go, this time's terrible. So the idea is something that I'm actively conscious of, that my time is good. And this type of thing, I think my time is actually, it's one of the best places to demonstrate how I use time, which for you, quote unquote, the collective you, I think is really, really good because it's not one of the things that gets talked about a lot, which is the idea is there's the click, there's the ability to own the click, just literally just sit there chugging 8th notes. And if you can't do that, put up a click or some sort of drum track that has, that is completely quantized and just sit there and hit some 8th notes, 16th notes, 8th notes, and just get to the point where you can own that. And then you start learning to be pliable with it. There's nothing wrong with quote-unquote guitar time, where it's got the floaty-boaty thing. Nothing wrong with that. But the thing is that when you ultimately listen back and you can't control the floaty-boaty, then it's a real problem. The other thing is there's a guy that I love dearly that I'm about to start doing a bunch of session work for TV cues. So we're going to co-write cues for television and film, and he has a bunch of stuff placed in shows like Pawn Stars. Like he just can't he as quick as he writes it, they place it. So I'm going to have a chance to be working with him again, and I absolutely love this guy, Brian Fuller. He's part of the Worship Tutorials crew, and he's got the magic touch. And so I'm going to have the privilege of working with him, bringing this type of guitar vibe in there, because I sent him this track and it's like, oh, we could get that stuff placed all day. And I'm like, okay. And the idea is the vibe of it, because when you're watching something on television, like whether it's Ink Masters or some show, there was a period of time I was watching that guy who had that custom car shop down in Los Angeles, some German named Brian Finkelstein, Stoner Stein. But you could tell there was this outfit that was getting hired over and over and over because the vibe, the material that they produced fit the show so well. You can hear the production on the drums. That's always the giveaway. The drum production, when it doesn't change, you're like, oh, that same group is getting all the work. And usually what happens is there's a placement agency or a couple of them that place these songs, and you basically have a style that people kind of go, I want this particular style. They'll basically be kind of requests for stuff. And then a bunch of production shops will kind of put that stuff together. And then when you find stuff that works for the show, they're just like, this works great. So the point being is the time is such an important part of this. And it was interesting. Brian's one comment wasn't like, hey, you got some cool chops. He was like, I love your time. And time will get you hired. Bad time will get you fired. Actually, bad time, you won't get hired. And look, we're not gigging a lot these days, but I cannot stress enough the value of being conscious of your time and doing that. So I will take a quick Wayne Finley. Hello, my dear friend. So speaking of time, Wayne is a brilliant multi-instrumentalist. He and I did a lot of time on the road. Wayne's accolades include guitar and keyboards with none other than the one and only Michael Schenker. And Wayne is a brilliant musician and knows all about time. So here's the thing. I didn't have great time as a kid. It was really one of those things. So when I was at GIT, I finally, out of desperation, one night just went, I'm going to sleep with a metronome underneath my pillow. Because I was like, I'm going to reach my subconscious. And that was all it took, kind of one night. And wasn't like mysteriously the next morning I had perfect time. No, what's happening? Good morning, sir. Great to see you. Welcome aboard. Hey, so the idea is what it allowed time to do was creep into my subconscious. Greg Karpov, good morning to you, sir. In a way that it wasn't there. And then I was like, oh, I'm feeling this, right? Because the thing is whether it's some riff that you can't play, that thing that's outside your ability to grab it, it gnaws at you, and it takes away from your creative energy. So now that I've kind of spent a number of decades coming to understand the nuance of time. So with Keith, his time, the horse has got, the thing about when a horse is riding, it's going side to side. It's not like it's totally straightforward. And so the idea is it's got some motion. That's okay if it sits in the track. Matter of fact, I'm going to pull up the guitar track on its own. That's what I'm going to do right now. And I'll hopefully remember to bring this back. So hang on just a second. So that for me, that's like years of work, but you can hear no, 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 boom, boom. The way I manipulate the time to choose which piece sits where in the track, because it's almost like it's a call and response between the parts. And the thing is, what's exciting about doing this sort of thing, even though I could, just for pisses and giggles, do one of the ways you could record something like this with video is you play and get the audio. Is that you record it, you don't loop Pro Tools, although you can do that. You basically just cut and paste the track with a little bit of space in between it over and over, and I've done that before. And it's a great way to just kind of go, you know what, I want to have a couple of takes to choose from. But in this particular instance, like, at the point I'm cutting the guitar, it's like 2 a.m, and I'm like, I got to sleep at some point. So the idea is like, I've got the 2 cameras. I can cut between them, so that's a great edit point. So say, for example, you've got half of one take that you like and half a take of the other. By recording multiple versions in a row, both videotaping and running the audio continuously, then you can kind of edit on a cut between different versions. I didn't do that here, and my buddy Lincoln Brewster had this conversation with me, and it really resonated with me. On Pro Tools, it's really easy to cut and paste and cut and paste. Guess what? On some level, it feels like it's cutting and pasting, although this part really has 3 unique sections that are played 3 unique ways. If it got longer, the temptation to cut and paste becomes very high. And for many of us, that becomes part of our workflow. But the problem is we lose and don't practice this concept of playing the track from start to finish. That was one of the things I loved about this particular one is, hang on, let me just double check in Pro Tools, with the mic's on, that the guitar part is, all right, let me get Easy Drummer out of there. Yeah, that is literally just one continuous take. No massaging in Pro Tools, which, you're like, all right, well, it wasn't hard. But the way the time is happening there, I was extremely sensitive. I was just me and the drums playing together where I'm being very conscious about what I'm playing. And also with drop D, you've got to be really like, it's basically like every time I go down to the bottom strings, it's kind of like, you have to relax. The other thing that you do is you move your right hand just a little bit closer to the bridge such that you can hit softer, but it makes it like the attack sound like it's just as hard. So you're kind of doing this thing and you're kind of going, all right, I'm back to this other position. Now I'm back at the bridge. Now I'm back over here. And you're playing the part. And you got cameras going. You're like, all right, it has to look cool or something like that. And the idea of making that happen is really key. So, Eric, my friend, always a pleasure. I'll be seeing you a little bit later on. Okay. Rafa, how are you, my friend? I gave you my cell phone number because you and I need to talk and develop a game plan. The good news is that the majority of my insanity is still continuing, but the workflow has dropped. So I got some stuff to cut for you. So let's talk this week. I would love to. I trust you're doing well. By the way, Rafa, many of you know Rafa, but he's working on this amazing studio, which is pretty darn cool. All right, awesome. Okay, now let's see. Okay, so let's do this because I do have a lesson that I'm going to jump to at, I think it's at 10:20. And so, by the way, those of you that missed it last week, we did an amazing marathon 6-hour show. I kid you not. It was literally a 6-hour show. I don't know what's wrong with me. It's my lesson at 10, there we go, 10:20 or 10:40. I think it's 10:40. Let me double check. Come on. All right. Come on. All right. There we go. Good. 10:40. All right. We got a minute longer. All right. So here's the deal. One of the other things I want to talk about in a moment is going to be working with, well, okay, for video. Because more and more of us are interested in video. And there are a couple of things. I have a guy, Brian Wall from Worship Tutorials, who is like my best buddy ever because he's the guy that is helping me get some of my video stuff together that the short version is you could spend hours and hours and hours choosing which gear you want. And by the way, I'm not seeing any questions. Oh, Andrew, I love you dearly. That is so cute. That's really kind of the stuff I want to unpack around the audio side of it. And so at this point, I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about the video side because I think for some of you folks, first of all, we're an hour into this, so I think it's a good turning point. So, if video is not your thing, or you want to see how expensive a friend I really am, you can choose to go or stay. I encourage you to stay and invite you to do so. Cool. All right. So here's the thing. These days, I basically, Robert Valdez. Okay, hang on a second. All right, hang on a second. We have a question here, which I will gleefully answer. Hang on. Look at this, a multi-part question. Look at this. I love this. Let me roll up my sleeves. All right. Do I use Air Sub 8 as well or another sub? That's a great question. I have never, and I want to be careful the way I say this and why I say this. I have never used a sub, and I was very conscious of that. The reason being is I felt, right or wrong, and this is an opinion purely based on emotion. Much of the time, 75%, maybe a little bit higher, my emotions lead me to the right decision. But I'm also conscious of enough that when I feel that strongly about something, I'm usually kind of blinded by the strength of the emotion. So with that said, I've always felt that the decisions that I made on having the subwoofer there would not be the best decisions I could make sonically when it goes out in the ether, knowing a bunch of people do not have a sub. And so because of that, and yes, you could turn the sub on and off, but I've always kind of been, even with the NS10s, where there was no low end, and you had to imagine the low end there. That's the process, operative word for today is process, that I learned to do this thing with. And I think ultimately that served me well in that I was just like, and here's the other danger. And this is really important. And this is not condemnatory of subwoofers, but there is nothing worse for blowing the mix in a room that was not created for audio than adding extra bass. And so, for example, for those of us that, kind of, and I've had subwoofers like years ago, I bought fancy pants Bose system with those cute little speakers that mount up in the ceiling. And then you'd always place a subwoofer where? And this is why a couple of weeks ago I said, do not place your studio monitors in the corner. They'd always say, put the subwoofer in the corner because it basically fills the room with bass. So the problem is you start making bass-heavy decisions about your mix that if your subwoofer is not placed in the right place and your room is responding to the bass, then you start to undermix the bass. And I because I started on NS10s, Yamaha NS10s, sorry, every so often this happens. Let me not be too inside. There was a period of time, and it's still largely true, that you could walk into any professional recording studio in the world, and there would be these little speakers on their side with these white woofers, Yamaha NS10s. They were, despite what the tannoy people will tell you, that was the industry standard besides the larger form factors that you would see in the studios. Because everybody could go from room to room to room to room to room to room and know what your mix was going to sound like on NS10s, which is why even in your home studio, you would go with the NS10s. Yamaha made a subwoofer that you could get that was intended, I don't think exclusively, but was intended in part to be paired with the NS10s. I opted not to get that. It's a great question, and it honestly is a very, very important question. And because I came from the school of NS10s where I opted not to use the subwoofer, and I think at some point somebody like Joel Jaffe, who I did the second half of the Doppler Effect record with back in the 90s, he kind of cautioned me against it. And I think he was just like, you may be opening a bigger can of worms by adding the bass that you're missing than mixing for the bass that you can't hear, as strange as that sounds. Do I recommend the Focusrite Scarlett as an intro-level audio interface? I think the Focusrite stuff is great. Without going into sweetwater.com today, the only ones that I would buy would be ones with a light pipe connection. So I think that's the 6 or something, TI6. I think the reason for that, and anybody who hasn't heard me say this before, is Focusrite. It's in my upstairs studio, specifically for this purpose. It's an Octapre Mark II dynamic, and there's a newer version of it. It's 8 channels, basically 8 channels on mic pre's with built-in compression that you have 2 different levels for that is also defeatable. So that is your expansion box that you can take down to your rehearsal space. You can use it to mic up multiple amplifiers and multiple sound sources in a video environment. So you've got your UA smaller form factor interface, and then that box, or in this particular case, the Focusrite audio interface that you can expand. And that expansion means that your initial audio interface, you now can bring it up to an additional 8 tracks, and you can, through light pipe, bring that up to at least 16. I think that you might have had the ability to go to 24, but if 16 ain't going to get you covered in one simultaneous thing, chances are a smaller form factor isn't going to be where you're going to be living anyway. But that's great. All right. Was a tube amp expander or aux for live use? Great question. I've used neither in a live setting. And so I will only go by what I do here in the studio and why. And it is again a huge luxury, and it would be unfair to not bring in my friends at this is the effect of lack of sleep. Hold on, let me grab them. They're usually not far off. Holy cow! 2 notes. Captor X. So the thing about the 2 notes is there's one of these is an 8 and the other is a 16 ohm. So they do not have the ability to select multiple ohmages. But if you take a look at the size of this guy compared to the size of that guy, if I want to have one of those on top of my desktop versus an amp top box, I think the 2 notes is there. So I want to actually have this conversation about all 3 of those, and it would be unfair to not include this little guy. Now, what I've got here that I'm negotiating, trying not to hit myself in the head. This bar right here is for photo papers. This room also doubles. Oh, you can't see the bar up there. Doubles as a photo studio, sort of. But the other night, there's a bar up there, a little black bar, and came off and hit me in the bridge of the nose. Not a good thing. So we also then talk about the Rev, which has got the 2-note stuff built into the back. So first of all, I use all of them in this moment for very different things. And I'm about to start doing a number of different things for a number of different reasons. So I'm going to do the politician thing here, which is where I'm going to kind of talk about all of them because I'm friends with all those people. And all of these boxes that are here were sent by the manufacturer. That is to say, I first of all, it's an interesting thing where I was on one of the I was on one of the Quad Cortex Facebook groups, and one of the guys from one of the manufacturers went on there, seeing me talking about a different manufacturer's box. It was an awkward moment, so I need to be sensitive without being a prostitute. So the thing is that the interesting thing is the moment I think of that amp, there's no second thought other than the aux, because I used that before on the first batch of demos that I did for the folks over at Solo Dallas. And it just worked so great. The other thing about that particular box is that the reactive load, as I understand, is actually based on a deluxe reverb. So it basically means that for anything that's in the Fender family, so that means that guy, there's a 60s Pro reverb, which, by the way, is the greatest Fender amp, in my opinion, ever made. There's the deluxe reverb. There's the 64 Vibroverb. There's the Tweed, the Edge Tweed Deluxe. So there is a ton of Fender stuff here. So because of the fact that it's kind of, as I understand, the reactive load is based on a deluxe reverb, pretty much anything that's Fender, that's going to be my first place to go. And that's not to say that's all it does well, but it's just kind of like, them like, Fender, there's the aux, And so literally I pulled that amp out and I just stuck that in. It's just like, it wasn't even a second thought. So in a live sort of a setting, that would be the same sort of thing. And one of the challenges I've got is I have 3 Waza tube amp expanders here, and I've only got 1 aux. The 2-notes folks have been kind enough to ply me in multiple devices, and one each of the 8 and one of the 16, so it allows me to kind of use multiple amps. So in terms of the Waza tube amp expander for the Neural DSP Quad Cortex, one of the things, and I'm sorry, I'm rabbit trailing a bit, but it's actually, since we're on this topic, this is a topic that's near and dear. Sorry, I had to pull this out. I feel you. Thank you very much. My depth of emotion about Neil Schon and his guitar playing could not be contained merely in words, as awkward as that sounds. So I totally feel you. All right, so the thing is that there are a lot of nuances to this stuff. What I love about the Waza tube amp expander, turn your email off there, moron. Okay, bye-bye. All right, what I love about the Waza tube amp expander is that these 2 controls that I just reached to that you couldn't see there, are basically the resonance and the presence controls. And that allows you to tune the reactive load to match the source amplifier such that the way that box reacts is closest to how that amplifier itself would interact with the speaker cabinet. And so what it's doing is sending information reactively, this is the reactive load, back to the amplifier saying, oh, I'm a speaker cabinet responding to you, Mr. Amplifier, and I'm sending you information back. And that way, this round trip kind of 360-degree process is going on where the amp is reacting. That's why the reactive load is so important. It's not like the signal just spouts out. It reacts to that in the same way that, in some ways, if you load your pickups with, with certain, there's, I'm not going to say this very eloquently, but your pickups have an impedance. And certain things you can do load the impedance of that signal as it gets to the front end of the amplifier. And so there is something that the radio folks put in just about all their guitar things called drag, where they try and recreate the vibe of what would happen if your pickups were plugged straight into the amplifier. Although it's not necessarily this round trip process, it is slightly barely analogous. But in this particular case, the power amp section of the amplifier is having this whole conversation with the speaker cabinet that's going back and forth. So tuning the reactive load to match the output transformer and style of the amplifier is hugely important if you're going to go totally down the rabbit trail for capturing as close as humanly possible this stuff for creating presets and neural captures and profiles for the Kemper, which is a huge part of my business plan for 2021. And I'm going to very actively, dare I say aggressively, go into that. And I've got a video that is edited, but I'm continuing to bang away because that's what I do, for Celestion on their full range live response speakers that they'll be putting out very soon. And the presets that I used in this case, are going to be available for free. They were all based on the sounds that I created for their full range live response speakers. So I may or may not opt to adapt them after the fact for kind of the built-in cabs. The idea is for people who buy the Celestion stuff and then want those sounds. It's really the idea is you get those for free. And if you want to tweak them, maybe I'm just going to let people do that. But the idea is those are going to be free, but increasingly I'm going to be, and because this whole Celestion thing is going to be going through a range of different modeling devices in each one of the videos in the series, I'm going to make those presets available as a professional courtesy extended by the privilege of working for Celestion on this project, which is, it's a big project. It's bigger than I realized coming into it, and it's really cool. So in terms of the live use of this, I know Neil Sean, when last I heard, was using the Waza Tube Amp Expander live. It would depend on the amplifier. I would actually probably be inclined to use the combination of things. When it comes, and that's why I pulled this guy out, especially for the praise and worship folks. The Two Notes remote software in here, although you can't. The short version is on the output here with the XLR out, you have a button that allows you to go. Well, there's a ground lift, of course. But there's basically, you have the ability to go turn the speaker on or off without it affecting the load. You can use it without a load, but you also have the ability, this thing's so amazing. You can choose which ohms it's running at. But you can also choose whether the outputs are running pre or post power amp. So you can choose if you want to have the power amp included in your output, as well as the ability to run at 4 or 20 watts, which basically gives you the ability to manipulate headroom. So this is the nuance of this, is that when you have a 4-watt version of the amplifier, you turn it up and it gets into overdrive much sooner than on the 20-watt version, where at the same setting, you have more headroom. So the idea is you can manipulate the headroom and you can go pre or post power amp. If you go pre-power amp, then all the stuff you've got in the box with the Torpedo remote software means you can just go to town on basically an amazing sounding preamp, and just build whatever power amp you want around it. And I've spent hours just building out sounds with this guy, and it's amazing. So again, 3 very unique boxes that kind of do 3 unique things. The other thing about the Universal Audio thing that I have not yet manipulated is that it's got all this great Universal Audio plugin stuff there on the stage. So that's really cool. That said, that Waza Tube Amp Expander, it's in the rack. You can't see it, but that's my SD3000. I've had that puppy since the 90s. That is kind of the iconic roll and delay. That's what the DD... I don't know if the DD1 was there actually a DD1, but that's what the DD series was based on. It's a little sound box. It was based on that little guy. In fact, they took a bunch of the kind of the cool little technology and shrunk it down. That's what makes those boxes so cool. So SD3000 is built into those. And the funny thing is, I was at an AM show and I heard it. And like, it has a particular ping to the sound of the delay that's slightly metallic, but in a lovely way. It's all over Steve Vai's stuff early on. And you can just recognize the sound, those long delays, and then the slight da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da on the Alcatraz stuff. That's the SE3000, and it's just an iconic sounding delay. So that's built into that puppy, and you can just recognize it. Okay. Okay, hang on. Why word wrap? I figured this out last week. Every so often, you just kind of go, can't you just remember anything? Really, I should be able to do a right click and have word wrap come up, but no. All right, I'll just drag that column for right now. Uh, I have not been able to find a solution to using wireless headphones without latency. Um, I do not use headphones or in ears unless I absolutely have to. Uh, I already mix at stupid volume. Don't do what I do. And I play music at stupid volume. So it's not just for the sake of stupidly just being too loud. I like the feeling. I like the feel in my body, the feeling of loud music. So I'm not your expert on that. I actually found that I'm going to say it, the PreSonus Bluetooth headphones didn't seem to be latent, but I didn't actually do any measurements. So let me do a little bit of research and get back on that, Robert. But I actually liked them because, again, they were continuous with the monitors I had. It was an ecosystem, and they were actually synonymous with that. Idea, Bob Clearmountain, mixer for Bruce Springsteen, Rolling Stones. Hold on, there we go. Where is this? Ryan Adams puts the bass next to the drums because he likes to see visually where the bass guitar is talking to the bass drums and in general. Oh, that's great. I love that. Thank you for that, Robert. So yeah, here's the thing: is like here's the other reason they generally will sit next to each other. That's a great idea to visually see them in the track, which I love. That's genius. I want to think when I'm the bass player, I'm thinking about the drums more than I'm thinking about the guitar. Yes, in this particular case, and it has gotten me into trouble in the past when I go to add the bass after the guitar, because then you're going, well, do I pay attention to the guitar when it travels out of time? Do I hang with the drums? And you kind of have to slalom between the two, which is a little bit of what I did in this track. But when you listen to the way the guitar was on its own, the guitar was actually pretty darn in time. I do pull back a little bit, and so the bass was responding to that. I'm gonna pull that back up here real quick. Why don't you just listen to the guitar here real quick? Soloing just the guitar. There we go. You get the point there. So the idea. Wait a second. Did I go to the right window? Nah, that didn't go to Pro Tools. So I'm sitting there looking like, oh. So this is what I thought I was on. All right. So the point being, you can hear the way it's going back, I'm purposely pulling back on that spot. It's a really interesting thing because that's where, as a guitar player, you just want to rush. And that's part of what I try and do is kind of go, okay, I have to. It's kind of like almost a guitar player babysitter. I know when I go da 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 da. That's just where you just want to rush that part, and I purposely instead have to go da 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 da. That because that's what makes it feel like classic rock. And those dudes in the 60s, they were like, they were on another plane, shall we say. They weren't in a hurry and they weren't like all up on their cell phones and texting in their cars and honking in downtown traffic. They were like, it's groovy, dude. Da, 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 da. So to get in that vibe without getting in that vibe, you got to really be aware of what's happening in the time, right? And that's what I love about that music of the 70s, which is kind of when I grew up experiencing those records that are very classic rock, but those were new albums that, what is that Fleetwood Mac song? But Eagles is a great example. New Kid in Town. I remember being in Chicago, driving from the airport to go to my uncle's house. At this point, I'm like 11. Maybe 12, and I'd been playing guitar for a couple of years at that point, and electric guitar for maybe a year or so. And I just remember hearing the sounds on New Kid in Town, just kind of going, because ooh, goosebumpies. It's just like you just listen to it and you're just like masterfully played, and just the tones and ironically. that's part of why I reached for that amp top box, is it has a vintagey vibe that I just love. So, at the same time, the way those players, really paid attention to time, that was a really important thing. All right. Let's take a look at this. Okay. Oh, that's great. Okay, hey, I've got Rafa, and I can't pull him in here. Bobby, I won't quote that, but that's funny. All right, Rafa, I need help with acoustic treatment design. So let's talk, because there's a number of different things, because acoustic treatment is everything. You can do all the other work, but if the room doesn't give you the ability to need in your mix location and your tracking location, and every room is going to have a sound. You can't get rid of the sound, but tuning the room and not having to spend $1 bazillion, but being conscious of what you're doing on a combination of both reflection and absorption is really what it comes down to. Tom Atkins, great to see you, my friend. Always a pleasure. Russ Pettit, hello, my friend. Hey, Doug, what small tube amp combos do you like? Just got a couple Fender Pro Junior 4s, which sound awesome. I'm looking for some other options for recording as well as others for small tube combos. Thanks. Okay, I let me just say it. First of all, great, awesome. This little Princeton, it's the hand-wired 1964 Princeton. It's a $2,000 amplifier, and it's awesome. I absolutely love this amp. Just sounds great. It feels great. It's got a 10-inch speaker in there. The reverb sounds great. There are some different demos I've done with it. In particular, there's a Tele Custom that's kind of my go-to clean. I can't find it easily, but it's just like in the neck pickup, it's just a beautiful amplifier. But the other thing is, in this particular case with the Solo Dallas Storm, I'm beating up the front end there, and it's loud. Like, ask the neighbors. Okay, hang on. I'm going to get over to that other chat in just a second. All right. So yes, can't go wrong there. The other thing is that there's another amp that's here. That's the Matchless SC30. It's great. It's a 112. It's great in that it does a classic AC30 thing, and it's got both a 12 AX7 channel and an EF86 channel, which is the jangle thing. And the thing is you can play anything. What's great about the Vox style amplifiers is what a lot of people don't know is they are phenomenal blues amps. I realize they're not classically in the Fender end of things, but that is a phenomenal amplifier. Rafa, let's connect this week for sure. Let's just exchange. You have my phone number, so shoot me a text, and we'll figure that out. Population has more than doubled since then. I love that. Okay. The 60s were more than just a different plane. It was a different planet. I love it. Boom. Yes, Tom. I couldn't agree more. Chris, what's going on, my man? Okay, thoughts on the new Helix update. If it hasn't been discussed, how goes it, Doug? Great to see you. So here is the sad and tragic news of my life. I had a revelation this morning, which is one of the things that's one of the projects that I'm working on was suggested that I make sure that I get an extra video in the can. And it just occurred to me that, like, it's never occurred to me to have one video that I'm sitting on. I'm pretty sure my buddies at Worship Tutorials just live that way, where there's at least one video they're already sitting on, so that they're not just kind of going from project to project. The challenge is that I am endeavorous enough with all the different things that I'm doing. Like, I have more plates spinning than I arguably should, but that's just kind of it. So the sad reality is that I have witnessed this update from afar, which really sucks. I can tell you, not targeting this towards the Worship Tutorial guys, because I know they dropped some new content for it. But all the Orange amp demos I've heard have sucked really bad. And as a bunch of you guys know, my relationship with Orange goes way back. And I guess maybe people just don't know those amps, but it's the Rocker Verb 100, and that's a flippin' amazing classic rock amp. And everything I've heard, I'm just like, that doesn't sound like the amp. And I think it's just a matter of, and that's not sliding the people that are doing the demos. It's just kind of like, here's a danger. Oh, you know what? I didn't do the humor thing. All right, hang on. I did something this morning. This is the danger of being early in a release. And this is kind of one of the things. So, like, I didn't put out the first Quad Cortex video. I had the benefit of watching what other people did. But the other thing is, and I had this conversation with Brian from Worship Tutorials, the danger of dropping it as soon as something comes out is you haven't had a chance to live with it. And I discovered something else about myself. This is pursuant to most of you. I have to have a creative experience with a piece of gear before I can really begin to do some sort of demo with it. And conversely, I also discovered why it takes me so long till I get to the point like, now I'm ready to turn on the cameras. And at the point that I turn on the cameras, I've got process. But I was like, wait a second, how is it that I've made this many videos at this point and I don't have the ability to just go, all right, here's this piece of gear, let me turn it on. And I realized I have to have a creative experience with that piece of gear before I can get there. So to answer the implicit question is, I think there are a bunch of folks that have not played any of the orange amplifiers. And so making a video about an amp that you've never played is really... Well, I guess here's the thing is that I guess there's a lot of people that never spent time with orange amps. So, but at the same time, making content about it, you're making sonic decisions without the background on it. That's dangerous. I also think the dynamic hall reverb, any of the praise and worship people that are out there, I think that's going to be the new go-to reverb for the worship folks, which is great. And then I was reading through the update list, of which I'm just like, these guys just don't stop. It's just amazing. So the other thing that they added, which I didn't realize they didn't have it before, but I guess I should have realized it, they have tuner spillover. Hello. So that is to say, you got your patch going and you step on your tuner. Quite often what happens in different devices, the processing stops, the tuning starts, but if you've got delay or reverb going, those trails stop. So the thing is that it's a funny thing. Praise and worship folks use a lot of big speed, and they're basically never really completely in tune after the moment you touch it, right? So the point being is you'll constantly see they're sneak tuning the entire time. And so because of that, the ability to actually have, spill over into tuner, they're just always thinking of great stuff. So I got to do a video on that. I'll have to investigate that. How about that? I think one of the things that I do know about that loosely is the impedance on input for the guitar thing. Largely, I've ignored that, which is probably really stupid. But I just kind of plug in because here's the thing: is I think out of the box, most people just plug into it. And I believe you're referencing to the input, and because a minute ago I was talking about loading the impedance of your pickups down by the time it gets to the front of the amplifier. So it is a thing, right? So again, the radial guys have this thing called drag inside pretty much all their boxes, like their AV boxes, all have it because they know by the time you get all this cable and all this stuff, it loads down the pickup and it behaves differently. Here's the thing: is I am inching closer and closer towards actually doing I've managed to miss all the firmware updates, and I've just been so busy. It's lame, but it is what it is. All right, 7 minutes here. Jerry Kane, what's going on? Just tuned in. Have you talked about Auxbox and the 2 notes attenuators behind you? Your thoughts on attenuators like the Tone King and Waza? I need one or two. Jerry, I did, and so because I've got 7 minutes until my first lesson starts, I'm going to gently and generously ask you to scroll back in the timeline or just head back. My apologies. And, the other thing is that going into the next show, there is a spreadsheet. In fact, I should still have this here. I should be able to cut and paste that guy. There we go. Feel free to ask specific, rabbit trail me, which one, why, all of that. I have not used the Tone King. we were talking about this. They all have their own unique things. They are all uniquely situated for slightly different things that I do, which is why I toggle between them. If you're looking for convenience and just like easy form factor, smallest, easy to use, stick it in your gig bag, really kind of hard to go wrong. And the cabinet stuff, these guys have just been owning this. And my first experience before I jump into video here was, whoa, hold on. Wow. Okay. All right. Okay. So I'm obviously going to have to mess with this. All right. Fine. All right. Thank you for that. I love people moving me forward towards something. That's always a great thing. Okay. Bobby, with great pleasure. So Jerry, scoot back and check that out but then you feel free to ask follow-up questions. All right. I want to jump into Videoland. So this right here is DaVinci Resolve. And this is the video platform that I've moved towards, and it is where I live, and I love it. So let me head over there, and let me just kind of talk through kind of what this is. This is kind of funny. I am a reformed Premiere person, but ironically, because Premiere is what I was using for so long, that's actually what the intro that I use each time where it lives. All right, so this right here is basically the main timeline. Ooh, let's see. I'm going to mute my main output so it doesn't scrub like that. In case you haven't spent time in a non-linear editor here, good. Let me just make sure this looks good over here. Good. All right. Basically, in green are the audio tracks, and in blue are the video tracks. So basically, what I have a tendency to do, it's a strategy, is that I will always have my main A camera, what some people would refer to as a wide shot. But for me, because I shoot with multiple cameras, that's my A camera. And right over here, you're going to see my B camera. So the idea is that as you kind of scroll through the timeline, one of the things that I like to do is set up some sort of little thing like this. And I kind of wear out some of the stuff. But I like the kind of zoom in on the logo and then do a little transition. You can see this little business right there. It's going to be really tiny, but you may be able to see there's a little red bounding box that I get when I click on this little dealio right hither. Well, now it's selected all of that business. But that bit right there is basically a crossfade where it's basically, no, that's actually just not a crossfade. That's a fading out. So that guy's, but it's actually doing a crossfade. No, that actually is a crossfade, but it is fading out. And underneath here, I've got a piece of the B cam. So hang on. So what I did here is I've got a cross. No, hang on. Let me zoom in a little bit. You should be doing a fade. Yeah, there we go. So this guy is fading in. So while this guy is fading out, you're getting this crossfade, but I've got them happening on separate layers, such that when we get over to here, then it jumps. So we got this business going on. There you go. And then it jumps on that edit there. This cruises along. I've discovered that more often than not, I don't cut right on the edit point. I will sometimes, if there's something that I'm doing where I switch from the A cam, or in this case from the B cam to the A cam, you can actually see on the notes down here, right here, that this guy right, if I move this little arrow right, okay, this is the timeline right there, where that is on the bottom row, which is the audio, you'll notice that there's a little tiny bit I get there a little bit beforehand so you can see, there you go, you see my right hand setting up for that. And it means that it's a little bit less of a visual strain on your eyes. I got 2 minutes before my lesson starts here. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is just kind of like, I do these little things, and it will have a little lag because I'm streaming at the same time. But basically what I do is I do a push. Actually, this is a fake push. What I did was I actually set I set this up such that this guy comes in on the top and looks like it's pushing the video over there. But I actually did that utilizing let me get into, I'm in edit, and let me get over to, why am I not seeing what I want to be seeing? Oh, because I don't have you selected? No. What have I got wrong here? Come on. Because I'm not seeing the because I'm not on a transition. Okay, got it. So all I did was I basically set up keyframes and just moved on one keyframe. I'm there. On the next keyframe, I got it moving there, and it just kind of moves along on its own. And then I kind of had this guy, the same thing with this guy. This guy kind of comes in, so it makes it look like it's pushing the video across to the side there. And that's a trick I like to do because it allows you to see the box without me having to kind of completely disappear. And then I do a crossfade there, and then at the same time, then I also do that on a cut to the B cam, which I like doing. Just makes it a little bit more visually interesting. I love that down the neck shot. I could do that all day long. And boom, back to the A cam. Again, this is kind of a classic thing. I'll find some spot in the video where I've got some sort of, let me mute those tracks or hide those tracks. You'll see that, like right about here, I'm always looking where I'm doing something with my head or making some particularly good version of guitar face such that it looks like I'm excited about the track as opposed to someplace where I'm just kind of sitting there. All right, it is time for my lesson. So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, it has been Dave Morrison. How are you? Near and dear to my heart. Right, I couldn't forget. Now, Dave, normally, the funny thing is, Dave, I thought about you. Dave makes these Stage 1 boards that I use on anything that I need to isolate from this bass. And there's usually not one far from here. And the funny thing is, I was thinking about using one underneath the Princeton, and then I was like, wait, I don't have the speaker connected. It doesn't matter. But when I was prepping for the shoot, I almost went and grabbed one of these, and I realized there's no. So he makes these Stage 1 boards that I place under basically anything other than a 412 to isolate it from anywhere. And his the isolators that he makes, in this case, I've got the Apertas. They're underneath every monitor that I use. He makes the best isolation stands that you could ever want to use. Basically, if you're spending any time in the recording studio, if you don't have one, your mixes are noticeably worse because of it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I need to go teach guitar. Much love. Thanks for hanging out. This has been a huge amount of fun. I hope it has served you well in your journey to take your music to the next level. Have a great week, and I look forward to seeing you next Saturday. Cheers.